Hello, I'm Msgr Jim Lisante. This week, my guest on Personally Speaking is Father Michael Masteller. Father Michael is a newly ordained priest from the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and has a lot to say about the church and about faith and about his journey to embrace the invitation of Christ to be a priest. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante, and Father Michael Masteller joins me now. Father Michael is a priest for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. He grew up in Santa Paula, California, and attended Thomas Aquinas College, where he double majored in theology and philosophy. Father Michael then moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where he became a high school teacher of theology. It was during these 2 years of teaching that the seeds of his vocation began to grow. Father Michael returned to California and entered into formation for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and was enrolled in St. John's Seminary in Camarillo in 2015. After 6 years of seminary training, Father Michael was ordained a priest on June 5th, 2021. In July, he was assigned by Archbishop Jose Gomez to St. Helen's Parish in Southgate, California, where he currently ministers as an associate pastor. Father Michael's here with us today to talk about his spiritual discernment, his faith formation, and about the journey to embracing the response, the invitation of Christ to the priesthood. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, Father Michael Masteller. Father Michael, I'm going to begin this questioning by mentioning to our listeners and viewers around the world that Father Michael Masteller is just come from confession in his parish. And I'm wondering, because I'm 40 years into this, what was it like the first time when you're newly ordained to hear someone's confession?
It was humbling. I don't know. It's hard to put into words. I think it's just, and to realize that I had that spiritual power was also kind of, I don't know. It was just, it's very humbling that someone would come to you, open up in that kind of way. And then to speak the words of absolution, to kind of almost be like, wow, do I have this? I don't know. I felt like I was just kind of in awe.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, the Spanish, so I'm at a Spanish speaking parish. And so that was kind of one of the big things was, okay, like hearing confessions in Spanish, I can speak, but a confession, it gets very, there's a lot of subtleties and nuances and idioms and stuff. And so that was for me kind of a nervous, I guess that kind of preoccupied my attention. It was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And is it going to go well? But yeah, no, it's beautiful. I as a priest so far, I've been a priest. I was ordained June 5th. So was that almost, almost 3 months, but
isn't that great though?
Confessions are just very beautiful. And it invigorates me. I feel like I have more energy coming out of confession. I don't know. It's just very moving to see people who desire God, who really desire change in their life. And I don't know, as a father, like that's like just to feel that spiritual fatherhood, to say a word of encouragement, to encourage, and to really receive the mercy, right, that the Lord wants to give them, and to give instruction too when there's questions. And so it's an adventure. I feel like each week I've been a priest, I'm like a different type of priest, because each week I get more experience. It's like, okay, all right,
right.
And so it's all very new. So
it's all very new, but I think your first word was right on target. It's a humbling experience to know people trust us that much. And I remember when there was a discussion a couple of years ago in Australia, they were, I think, passing a law that said that a priest who heard of something criminal in confession had to tell the government. And of course, the Australian church said, no, we're not doing that. This is one sacred space where people can bring anything and know that what they're sharing is sacrosanct. And It's a powerful, wonderful witness in so many ways. I'm on Long Island, New York, which is about 40 miles out of Manhattan, but I go into Manhattan to St. Francis of Assisi Parish, and there's a wonderful confessor there. They have pretty continual confession in that parish. I don't think he speaks a word of English, which is why I go to him. But he's very forgiving, very forgiving.
Yes.
Now let's go back. Father Michael, when you were coming from a Catholic family, how Catholic was your family? Like, was it very, very much a practicing family? Was it an occasionally practicing? Well, I'm getting at, what's the family that formed and shaped your spiritual life early on?
Yeah, so I would say I came from a very Catholic family.
Okay.
My parents, we went to Mass every Sunday. We lived the faith. We lived the liturgical year. Some of my best memories as a kid were, Christmas, Easter, and not just, in the liturgy at church, but even in our home, just like we really lived the faith, like my parents, I think, did a very good job of, like the domestic church.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, so yeah, we live, the faith was always there. God was always a part of our life.
Yeah.
And the way that my parents raised us, I really enjoyed it because we would, we went to the Novus Ordo, but there was also a extraordinary Form Tridentine Mass that was close by.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would kind of go to both, and it wasn't, so as a kid, I served in both. And so that was a really, I realize what a gift to be able to kind of just in a very simple, in a non-polemical but just in a very simple way, just to see, both forms of the Mass,
Right.
to pray them and to, and that's something that, especially being in seminary and, now, like I realized that was just a great gift to be able to just, to pray, to see the beauty of both. And, so my family was
very Catholic and practicing.
taking the best fruits of both.
Okay. Now let me ask you, not every parent is overly thrilled to have a son become a priest. We talked about this recently of NIMBY, that in terms of putting any kind of special homes for the disabled in anyone's neighborhood in New York, it's always somebody should do that, but not in my neighborhood, not in my backyard. And in the same way with priesthood, somebody ought to be a priest. We need more priests, but I want grandchildren, and no, I'm not thrilled about my son ever thinking about the priesthood. The response of your parents when you said, I think this might be a calling for me.
Yeah, so I was living in Wisconsin. So I grew up in Ventura County, which is just north of Los Angeles. So after college, I was living in Wisconsin, and I came home for Easter, and was there at home for Easter, and just, I was a teacher, so I had a little time off, and Easter Monday, I told my parents, hey, I'm going to be gone for a couple of days because I'm going to go visit the St. John's Seminary, the seminary here. That's kind of how I broke the news, that I was, I kind of played my cards close to my chest. I wanted to kind of be sure things were kind of more real before I kind of shared that. And so my parents, I think the reaction when I told them I wanted to be a priest was joy. But I think when they heard I wanted to be diocesan, I think there was maybe some fear, some trepidation. And just as we know, with a lot of the scandals, a lot of the problems in the church. And I think for them, thinking diocesan, the reputation that St. John's kind of had in the past, I guess, which was before my time. But I think there was some fear of like, is my son, this is beautiful, he's going to be a priest, and this is what we support, but what type of priest or where is he going to be formed? And just, and so I think that was a fear that they had, which, and so, but it was good because we had some really good conversations. And for me, it was never a question of, oh, where do I want to go? Or what kind of a priest do I want to be? For me, it was always, this is where the Lord's called me.
Yeah.
And so I'm following that. And I'm not kind of, have my top 3 picks and kind of comparing them. To me, it was just a very natural, simple, I was discerning it, but for me, it was just a simple, like, no, this is the Lord's will. And I'm not afraid, of whatever, because I had no idea. I'd never been to St. John's. And I can honestly say, just being at that seminary was one of the greatest gifts I've had in my life. Just awesome. Great time, great brothers, good formation on the whole, nothing's perfect.
That's great to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, yeah. So I think it was for them. It wasn't so much the priesthood. I think they were
Right.
joyful in that, but I think it was more
Well, this is a
the
perfect
reality.
segue. This is a good
Yeah.
segue because you mentioned it. We have in our parish one of the largest pre-Cana programs in the diocese, and when you find out that young adults are not going to church, which they're not very often, one of the arguments they'll have is, well, I'm so angry at the church for the scandals. When you run into people who are troubled, as they should be, by the scandals, what's the way in which you explain that they should nonetheless think seriously about staying close to the church and not turn off the church because of past scandals?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I remember when I first heard all the McCarrick scandal, when it first broke,
Right.
I was in Mexico. I was doing my language immersion. So I was in a whole different culture, different language. And I remember being on my cell phone, and following the news, and no one around knew who McCarrick was in Mexico. They didn't really care. He's an American cardinal. And so I felt like I was like all alone trying to process this. I would talk with some of the priests and, they would listen, but it wasn't their, it's like, okay, whatever. It's just, an American problem. And so that was that was just very overwhelming. But I remember I ran across this homily by John Henry Newman. John Henry Newman. And pretty much he said, there's always been people who want a church without the weeds. And he says, I understand that. And he says, but I want the church of the wheat and the weeds, because that's the church that Christ said. That's what he said. That's what he promised us. And so anyone who promises a church without weeds, that's not the real church. And that really hit me. I think it kind of did the realism of the Lord's words. And I think just John Henry Newman, someone who I trust, I've read a lot of his sermons, and I really, I love him. And those words coming from him, someone who was taking sanctity very seriously, but at the same time wasn't giving kind of a pass or a kind of a permissiveness, or just this is how things are, but really this kind of, I don't know how you'd say, maybe kind of a humble, like, no, well, this is the reality that even the Lord kind of, and so to try to avoid that too strongly with kind of maybe too much of a rigorism, you might actually be trying to create something which the Lord doesn't really want, or the Lord is allowing this for that mysterious reason. And so, I don't know, even this morning in the Office of Readings, reading Jeremiah, he talks about Israel. They're like that camel just going everywhere in heat, and Israelites, you go under every tree and you've played the harlot with everyone, and it hit me this morning how this is the reality of the chosen people, but of sin and the constant need for conversion. Elijah fleeing from all the prophets of Baal, right? Who, and thinking that he was really, like he was the last one who's really living the covenant. And that's when the Lord says, no, like I forgot how many, 6,000 or 7,000, whatever. I've kept them for myself. And really the Lord telling him, like, you think that you're carrying the covenant on your shoulders. That's all in your hands. And it's not. I've kept for myself. I'm in control.
Right.
For you, it seems like everything's fallen apart. No one believes. Have faith. So that's kind of how I approach it. And I'm very sensitive to the anger and the frustration that people have.
Sure.
So I try to explain it away, but at least for me, in my heart, I don't struggle with maybe that doubt or that.
It's before your time, but when President Nixon was in trouble, the question they asked him was, were you destroyed by the press that never liked you, or the Congress? And he said, yeah, they certainly have always hated me. He said, but I gave them the sword that allowed them to put me out. And in the same way with the church, it's true that the media is no friend of ours, and we certainly have plenty of people who delight in the human weakness of the church. But in so many ways, we are responsible, and we've got to work to correct what has happened. And I hope we're trying to do that. Now, related to human frailty and human weakness, if you haven't been asked this, Father Michael Masteller is our guest. You certainly will be asked. You are a fairly normal guy. He even, by the way, for our listeners and watchers, plays a decent game of basketball. He's a down-to-earth, regular guy. And I mention that because I'm sure people are going to say to you, what are you doing as a priest that you can't do as a dedicated Catholic layman, a social worker, a teacher, so many walks of life where the Catholic faith can be demonstrated. And specifically, what they're asking you about is why do you have to be a celibate priest? So, celibacy to you, freedom or restriction?
Freedom.
Okay.
And on two, this is like a general, I mean, that's a huge question. And
Yeah.
let me just begin with my vocation has been a mystery. And that's what John Paul said, mystery and gift, his book. And I love how he just summarized his whole vocation with those two words, mystery and gift. There's a quality which is always eludes our grasp of our calling, right? And even our whole vocation. And yet we receive it as a gift. And so there's always this entering more deeply into the mystery, and yet really holding it as something that is beautiful and that's fulfilling. So when it comes to, it's just what the Lord did in my life. He came to me at a time and a place where I was very isolated, alone. I was in a lot of darkness, and the way that he entered in and found me and shielded me in the desert and saved me and called me to himself in a very intimate way, that for me, I've never, from that moment where the Lord called me, I've never really doubted my vocation, that calling, because it was so transformative for me. Yes, have I discerned marriage and, right, and my heart, what am I desiring? What am I looking for? Absolutely. I think that's, again, one of the great joys, the growing pains, I'd say, of seminary was really, really facing that honestly.
Right.
Before I'm a priest, and praying with it, and really, talking with my formator, with friends, just in my own prayer with the Lord. And so for me, it's a path of freedom. And I'd say on two accounts, kind of one's a more natural,
Excuse me,
which is, I don't really like to use this one because it's kind of a pragmatic, but it's true. Like, I think about being a priest and being married, at least the way I want to be a priest. I'm still new, but just that the total availability, and I think, and not just availability, but emotional availability.
Yeah.
To those, there's so many people who are struggling, who are alone, or I don't know. And for me, just to be totally, not just physically, with my time, even emotionally, just to be like available in that way. So for ministry,
I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So for ministry, it's a very, for me, it's just like, it makes sense. That's more pragmatic.
The freedom to serve every family instead of your particular family.
Yes.
I'm the principal caretaker for my 100-year-old mom, and that has been an exhausting process. And I think sometimes a wife and kids would have been, while a beautiful, beautiful vocation, would have made it impossible to be the kind of priest that you and I are called on to be in diocesan ministry. Let me follow up. For those who don't know, Father Michael, before he went into the priesthood, taught high school in Minnesota, right? And
Wisconsin.
Okay, well, I'm wondering though, when you have kids to teach theology to, what sorts of questions were you getting from the kids in high school, and how easy or hard was it to answer their challenges?
Yeah. So, I'm glad you brought that up, because I would say that was a crucial part of my journey towards the priesthood. I went to Thomas Aquinas College, which was a very Catholic college, you could say, kind of very robust with its academics and taking very seriously their Catholic identity. So I was there, wonderful time. But then I went to, a diocesan high school in Kenosha, just south of Milwaukee in Wisconsin. And to a high school, which I think, like many schools, was struggling with its Catholic identity. A lot of the children were really enamored and held under the sway of not the gospel, but of the world, of social media, of just the message that their peers and just, everything is kind of giving them. And so to enter in, I was teaching juniors and seniors. So, kids who were a little older, more mature, and who had those deeper questions, and were, wanting to set out on their own. Like, what do I believe in? What do I think? And I had a wonderful team of other teachers from Steubenville, we all taught theology. But yeah, so for me to go into class each day was terrifying. It was like a battle. I mean, because nothing was, they were not afraid to ask anything.
Yeah.
And you had to be ready to, whether that was, but it was so good because I think it showed me the reality of where we are now. This is the next generation of Catholics. And these are good people, but there's a lot of confusion. And the seed of faith is in danger of being dried up or of being plucked by crows, not being watered. And so the great need that these students that are young Catholics need, and really what it came down to is just the very basic of faith. Is God even a real, put aside all the teachings and all the liturgy, just the very basic question of, is God real?
Right.
Do you
right.
really need God? And if not, then all this other stuff, why even? And I think that was, that really moved me, and it forced me to really go deeper in my own prayer life, really kind of answer my own questions. And that's where the Lord really pulled me, I think when I went out on that journey. So I feel like I'm kind of straying for your original question. I can't really remember what it was.
No.
Teaching was very, it formed me. It destroyed any kind of romantic, kind of immature, kind of Catholic identity or like the faith.
Right.
And it brought me to the hard reality of, I think, where we are now.
Yeah.
And yet I was fed. The Lord worked with those students. My coworkers were faithful. And it was the hardest, but some of the most joyful years of my life. And for me, that's the church of the future. And that's how I've approached the priesthood. My whole seminary life was not that kind of triumphalistic, like, oh, we're Catholic. And no, it's that we're going out there and the flock is in danger of being scattered.
What I love about what you're saying is it didn't scare you off. Some people, as a teacher in that situation, would say, God, if these questions, which are so direct and so honest, if I can handle them, I can probably handle a lot more, which is what you're going to have to do in the future. Let me ask you, during the pandemic, our parish, and we continue to be providing Mass every day online. And so we get lots of response. Most Masses, you have 8,000 or 9,000 people around the country watching. And I mention that because our own style of preaching here is pretty direct on the contemporary issues, whether it be the sanctity of human life or migration or any other number of issues. This past week, talking about Afghanistan and tying gospel values in with the real life that's going around us. I mention that because have you discerned for yourself yet what you can and cannot say, how you say it? To be political or not to be political, to deal with contemporary issues, or to just bring people back to the gospel and let them make the application to contemporary times. I know it's early in the journey for you, but what's your view of preaching, and how do you do it?
Yeah, I'm still new, and I'm feeling my way through this. But I guess generally what I would say is I really take wholeheartedly Pope Benedict's perspective on this. And it goes back to what you said, like, why be a priest? What's the difference between a priest and a social worker and just a regular Catholic, And I think it's because I'm a priest. In some way, I bring God to people. And that's what people need in the midst of polarization, in the midst of all these questions. It's a very complicated and difficult world we live in.
Yeah.
And we know every detail, and all of us have an opinion, and and I think in the midst of all that, who's speaking about God, really? And who's speaking about God in a beautiful and in a way with conviction, and just in a way that cuts through polemics, and that's not watered down, but is real.
I want to thank Father Michael Masteller for being with us. What I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm always conscious of the guest on our program who has kind of canned answers, and then there are others who think through the question and are both spontaneous and honest, and that's you. And I just appreciate that early in your priesthood, you are willing to speak about your journey, your search, the Lord, the people we're serving, the good and the weak in the church, and You're just very, very refreshing. I tried every year to invite newly ordaineds to come on and speak to us. And I was particularly struck because I get all these magazines and newspapers from dioceses around the country. But when I looked at the Los Angeles magazine, there were a number of vocations that were Asian, a number of vocations that were Latino, and then there was this Anglo kid, and I wondered, and I promise this will be my last question, is it intimidating when you have to work with many cultures in the Los Angeles area to be able to say, I can move past the particular way which I was raised, my culture, and really be open with the gospel to every culture? Is that a hard burden to carry?
I would say learning Spanish and being more deeply into the Hispanic culture has been one of the greatest gifts I've received in my life.
Wow.
It has expanded, my whole worldview, I don't know, I feel like as a person, I've entered more deeply into reality, to see reality from a whole different culture, through different language, different expression. Our seminary, St. John's, is very diverse. And the first year, I think it was kind of an adjustment because there's they had the Korean special mass and then the Filipino and then, but again, it's been an incredible gift. Yes. And I'm friends with so many good men at the seminary, many different cultures. For example, I always joke with my Korean friends at St. John's. It's I love the Korean church. It is such a beautiful and strong, and just their history is incredible. How pretty much the laity catechized themselves. It's incredible. And so and to see how each culture, different nationality, that the faith has taken root in a different way. It's the same seed. It's the same life. Mm-hmm. It has a different expression. I think that's made me a better man. I think it's helped to soften maybe hard edges that I've had. And I know that it's made me into a better pastor or, a better priest, because it helps me to refine what is the one thing necessary, and where is that beautiful flexibility that allows for, that the Spirit to express in different ways, in different cultures. So
perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Father Michael Masteller, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your heart and your vocation. And we'll be praying for you. Please pray for us as well.
Thank you, Monsignor. Yeah.
As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you have any comments or questions, you can reach me at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. Personally Speaking is also on YouTube. Just go to Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante, and don't forget to click like and subscribe. You can also get our podcast at personallyspeakingpodcast.buzzsprout.com or go to www.closeencountertv.com. Personally Speaking is also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante, and we're also now on Instagram at Personally Speaking Podcast. Please share and let others know about Personally Speaking. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.